So I think the thing about Korach, so I don't want to teach 13-year-olds that if you challenge authority, you deserve to be swallowed up by the earth. And I think that generally Korach gets a bad rap in a lot of the traditional rabbinic texts, like he was trying to overthrow Moses. He was arrogant. He wanted to become the single leader, all that. I don't think that's apparent in the text. I think, he says the whole people are holy and we should be sharing responsibility and leadership. And that's a good lesson. So, what more modern and not just contemporary, but like post Enlightenment, Buber and dudes like that write about it is that Korach had the right idea, but the people weren't ready yet to share. They're still in that spiritual infancy, which we see a lot as they traveled the desert. They're not ready to trust in God. They're not ready to trust each other. They're not ready to share leadership and move forward with this goal of, entering the promised land and all of that. And so that was the real problem, is that Korach didn't understand when or how it would be appropriate to share that leadership and responsibility and holiness and everything. And so I just read a contemporary midrash. I think it's by Arthur Waskow from this week, and it seems that he wrote it himself. I've never seen it before, and he doesn't attribute it to someone else. But he's writing about Buber and some of the other people that have held this belief that I just referenced. But then this idea I've never seen before, that he says, Rabbi Waskow says, Korach is like a seed. And that's why he has to be swallowed up by the earth to have time to grow and learn how to, rise up organically and healthily. And I really liked that. And of course, what weird timing that there was a sinkhole in Jerusalem last week, as we're talking about being swallowed up by the earth. I don't know what to think about that. I think it was just cars. I don't think anyone was hurt, is what I saw.
Whose neighborhood?
It was a whole neighborhood?
No, whose neighborhood?
Whose neighborhood?
Or you're not?
It was a hospital parking lot, I think, is what I saw. But it was just cars that fell in. There was nobody in them.
It's a warning.
I mean, when it happens during the week of Parashat Korach, it's hard not to think that, right? Like, I don't know what the warning is exactly, but it's weird. I don't know how common sinkholes generally are in that part of the world. So I missed the summary because we kind of just jumped right in. So just to give a little bit of a zoom out, and then we can get back into any details or places that hit people. So of course it starts with Korah challenging Moses's authority, and the beginning part is so full of, I think it's so interesting the way it all plays out, all of the details of it, because so Korah challenges Moses. Moses says, well, we'll let God decide. So we'll each offer, an offering, and, whichever one is accepted by God, God will make God's self known, who is God's special guy. But then Moses goes and falls on his face which I just, every time I read it, I giggle. Like, I know it's supposed to be like he falls in a position of supplication, like he's bowing down with his face to the ground. But he's so distraught. I like to read it as like he just threw himself down on the floor and is like having a temper tantrum. Um, but he prays specifically to God to not accept Korach's offering. Like he doesn't have enough faith that he's right. Inherently, he doesn't like trust that God will know whose offering to
Yeah.
pick. He prays. And then of course, then God picks Aaron's offering and not Korach's. And then Korach is still mad and like shoring up support against Moses. And Moses is like, well, I didn't do anything. God did it. And it's so like you asked for it very specifically. You could have left it entirely in God's hands, but you did intercede. Anyway, I think that's very
Here.
telling about Moses's position in this scenario. But anyway, then because the Jews are easily incited when Korach is trying to still rally them after his offering is not accepted, God wants to kill them all, but Moses and Aaron are like, no, please, not all of them, just the ones that we don't like. And the earth swallows up Korach and his family. It does say in the text that maybe it doesn't use the word all, but it implies that they're all killed, but there are later references to sons of Korach. So clearly some of his descendants did survive this purge, which is also interesting. And then, so after that's done, there are still more sort of trials to prove Aaron's specificity and like that Aaron is the true high priest regardless of anybody else's challenge or whatever, that Aaron and Moses are in charge, no question, that's who God wants. So there's another plague hits and Aaron goes and does some like spiritual cleansing, and so that the people see him doing that and understand he is working for them, or that he is facilitating between them and God. Then they all put the staffs in the Holy of Holies, and Aaron's alone grows almond blossoms. So there's all of these things of that, like, okay, so clearly Aaron is in charge. And then the Parsha ends with sort of a reiteration of some things we've read before about like gifts to the tabernacle, the redemption of the, Pidyon Haben, the redemption of the firstborn, that the Levites don't get a parcel of land, but they maintain a share of the gifts to the tabernacle in return for like being the caretakers of it, and all that. And so then the end is, it's like normal Leviticus stuff. So yeah, that's the Parsha. There's a lot. Was there anything in particular, any lines that jumped out at people? Yeah, David, go ahead.
Just a question. I wasn't sure I understood when I read this. When the Levites get all of these tithes and so forth, do they also have to tithe?
It said they did.
And who would get the tithe? Is it just part of the sacrifice that when they receive this, says, okay, this goes to God, and they burn it up?
Yeah.
Okay.
They don't have their own crops to give because they can't have land, but they separate out what is brought to the tabernacle, what is for them to survive on, and what just gets burnt up, as an offering to God. And also, like, then some stuff gets stored in case of, there's like the welfare fund, is stored at the temple. That might be a later thing, but yeah, the priests sort of arrange all of that.
Okay, so I did read it correctly.
Yeah. So in essence, they are tithing because they are the ones then that actually physically give the offering to God, but they don't have any of their own wealth really to give themselves.
It was in 1825, 26, 27, not the priests themselves, but the rest of the Levites. And it says, you receive the tithes, and then you shall set aside from them 1/10 of the tithe to give to the Lord. So
Yeah.
yeah, I guess that's where you found it, David.
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
Yeah.
So back to the very beginning.
Okay.
We read this in portions every week, but I was trying to tie the story together with what went before and what would have caused Korach and everybody else to rise against Moses. And I couldn't, I mean, the latest, the closest thing was that stoning to death of the woodcutter. But I mean, what changed that, or I guess it doesn't have to be a change, but is there any indication of what Korach was?
I mean, to some extent, it depends on which rabbi you read, right? Like, how critical of Korach do we want to be? I think I would say if we're trying to read it chronologically in the Torah, and tie it to what comes before, we can look at 12 people are sent into the Holy Land, and 10 come back and say, we can't take it. We don't want to. Let's just stay here. Let's go back to Egypt. Let's whatever. And Moses says, no, we're doing what Joshua and Caleb said, and I'm elevating Joshua to be my successor.
Okay.
And so then Korach might be like, well, what happened to democracy? Like, how long ago did we have all that thing about Moses delegating judgment to all of the tribes, and like having all of this transparency about what gifts were brought to the tabernacle? Like, Moses has a record of being a pretty decent democratic might be a strong word, but like
Administrator.
he's an administrator that's like for the people, he's not a dictator. So I could see why that would feel like a sharp shift to Korach. Yeah. And I had another, and that Korach is his first cousin. Korach is a Levite and might feel like, who is Joshua? Like, why does he get to be the successor and not one of us? So, that could also be part of it.
Okay.
But I think there's some I don't know how to phrase this, but that the fact that Korah is a Levite and has some sense of superiority, but then like isn't treated that way, I think contributes to his this attitude. Someone who expects to not be Moses' successor or to not be listened to or whatever wouldn't think to challenge Moses. But Korach is in a position to feel like his voice matters.
Do we know which role I didn't go back and look, but I know that the different Levites had different roles in caring for the tabernacle, and some of them were possibly more elevated than others. Do we know which role Korach and his his
The
group had?
Kohathites are definitely mentioned in that section, but I don't remember specifically
Okay.
what they do. I wonder if that's easily researched without having to just scroll forever.
Joel knows.
Joel? No? We put him on the spot.
I'm sorry.
Come up on Wikipedia.
That's okay.
Joel, unmute.
Okay, so he is, Korach is the son of Izhar, son of Kohath, Exodus 6:21.
Right. But the question is, what did there's part of what some of these sub-tribes of Levites were told exactly which part of the tabernacle was their responsibility. I found it. It's in Numbers 3. But the Kohathites, their responsibility was the ark, the table, the lampstand, the altars, and the vessels in the sanctuary. So that is pretty elevated.
Pretty elevated, yeah.
They're not outdoor
Right,
tent of meeting folks. They're inner sanctum.
right.
Okay. So
Okay,
yeah,
that could mean one thing or another then for the story.
yeah.
Well, it could mean something in that, why pick Aaron and his family to be the high priest? I mean, what's wrong with us?
Right. I think, sorry, go ahead, David, finish your thought.
That was basically the same thing, just expanding on it, but
Right.
a little jealousy.
I think there's jealousy. I think depending on how you read Korah and his goal, we can either see it as he really did want democracy, and this is a man of privilege using his proximity to power to overthrow it, or he wanted more power himself, and this is a man of privilege demanding what he believes he's owed. And so it depends on how you read what his goal is, or how arrogant he is in this exchange. And I think both are valid readings. Like, the text itself doesn't give us a super clear idea, like, because Moses ultimately wins, because Korach is swallowed whole, we tend to default to assume that he's a bad guy, because why would God do that to someone? But I don't think the thing he actually asks is, or like the thing he actually challenges Moses with, is actually that radical. So it's all about the midrash. Yeah, Joel.
Question for Rabbi Goldstein.
Uh-huh.
How would the reform movement justify itself vis-a-vis Korach? In other words, before the reformers came into existence, say 300 years ago, there already was a pretty strong Jewish tradition. Like, for example, the reform movement, 1883, conducted the Treifa banquets up in Cincinnati. That's like a pretty severe departure from Judaism. So like, would you see any parallels there, or would you, like, how would the reform movement defend itself sort of in the same way?
I'm not sure I understand the
I
parallel.
think they paid for that Trafe banquet by losing many people that had been their supporters. I mean, wasn't that one of the reasons the conservative movement got started?
Well,
So-
it's one of the reasons it's
One
split
of
in
them.
America. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, okay, what I'm saying is I'm kind of comparing Korach, who's saying, wait a minute, I want in on this. I'm kind of your relative. In, let's say around the 1700, I can understand a lot of rabbis might say, you know, we're entering into an era of modernity and we want to have some shifting of power, basically. And I just can't see where if I were there and someone had said, "Oh my God, we're going to have seafood," I said, "Oh my God, I don't think so." Like whatever you want to do at home, go do. I don't have any problem. But as an organization, I'm not sure we should challenge the establishment quite that way.
Well, to be fair though, the organizers of the Treifa banquet saw themselves as the establishment. I mean, Isaac Mayer Wise wrote Minhag America. Like he really thought that this was what Judaism in America was going to be. This is the Golden Medina. This is a time for assimilation. This is a time for equality and security for Jews, a time and a place for that. And so I don't think he saw like I mean, I guess he must have known it was counterculture to Judaism, but I don't think he saw himself as like standing up to any establishment because there was no one higher in the US. There was no chief rabbinate there, you know. Um, so I I just don't think I don't think it's the same kind of struggle as what we see with Korah. I guess maybe I see it with like in 17th or in 18th century Europe with like the Haskalah and more of the decisive break from the chief rabbinate and things like that, and um, more active trying to. But even that, like assimilate doesn't. There's in Korach's case, there's no one else he's trying to assimilate. It's still the same people. He's just trying to elevate more people to the same status as Moses, or at least himself to the same status as Moses. So I don't think those are comparable challenges. Not that one is more challenging than or more iconoclast than the other or anything. I just think they're different goals that I'm not really sure how to draw that connection that you seem to be drawing. Maybe I'm being too literal. Yeah, David.
It just seemed to me that there was, at least from the time of the spies, really back from the time of the golden calf, but I could kind of let that slide a little because Moses wasn't there.
Right.
He disappeared and people were scared and they were lost and they were raw. But this, following after the spies, it was like the people had said, we really don't want to change this status quo. We don't want Canaan. We don't want all of this stuff. But mostly it was we don't want. We don't
Right.
don't know what we want, but we don't
Right.
want whatever this is.
Yeah.
Because you've got, in addition to Korach saying the whole people is holy, why would you raise yourself above the rest of the congregation? You got the other two guys, Dathan and help me with the name, something with an A. I don't remember much anymore. Abiram.
Yeah.
And then On, who seems to not be necessarily part of the same group. But they say first they combined against Moses and Aaron, and then Moses tries to talk with Dathan and Abiram, and they flat out refuse to come see him, which is pretty close to a mutiny, it seems to me. I mean, Moses he wasn't just a guy there. He wasn't just some remote administrator. He was the head honcho.
Yeah.
And in any business, if your boss or if you're at a school, if the principal says, please see me, you don't say, no, I'm not coming to see you. You know, the
Right.
superintendent at school says, I'd like to see Dave Gilbert in my office after school. I don't have the option of saying, oh, no, I don't feel like going. I'm going to be there. So this was, to me, pretty extreme on their part to absolutely refuse to come to Moses. And then they had some arguments after that, but they certainly seemed mutinous to me.
Yeah.
So it was like there was this general mood that had been going on for a while of mutiny, of dissatisfaction, discontent. Certainly seemed to have forgotten that they were a holy people consecrated to God and they were there to do God's will. That just didn't seem to even enter into it.
Right. Well, I think that that point about Datan and Aviram's reaction elevates what Rabbi Wasco says and what Buber says, and that, like maybe Korach was just advocating for democracy, but the people weren't ready. And it reminds me of in Mean Girls, this is maybe too millennial, but after Katie successfully overthrows Regina and she thinks that she's liberated the school of the queen bee, she realizes she's just the queen bee now. And the two minions are still following her around going, now what? Now what? Now what? And like, that's what Datan and Aviram are. They're like, yeah, overthrow Moses. We don't need a dictator, but also we're just going to do whatever Korach tells us. Like, they don't know how to be self-made leaders, to share this responsibility together, to all be a kingdom of priests, a holy nation.
That's what it made when I read the paragraph about him saying, you have gone too far, for all the community are holy, all of them. It made me think of the dichotomy, like a Catholic priest is there to speak to God for his congregation. The rabbis, we know, are not there to speak to God for the congregation.
Right.
But back when we had priests, that was also their role.
Yeah.
But Korach is trying to minimize that role and let everybody speak directly to God from that statement he said anyway. And the other thing is that the portion goes to the trouble of calling the 250 Israelites, at least in my translation, men of repute, which sort of makes the enterprise a little more positive. So
yeah, I think it goes back to that point of like, these are not Joe Schmoes. These are men of repute. Because who would a Joe Schmo be to raise his voice against Moses? He wouldn't dream of it. Joel, you had a thing? Saw your finger.
Yes. So we were just talking about that Datan and Abiram would not come. And I noticed there's different translations in the English. Sepharia, I believe, says will not come. Now, my translation, which is older, of course, it says we will not come up. And the up is very important. I'm at chapter 16, verse 12. And the hint is in the Hebrew. It says lo na'alah. That is the root of na'alah is Allah. In it's such an important word for us in Judaism is going up. Of course, we have an Aliyah, we're called up to the Torah. You're going to move to Israel, you're going to make Aliyah. The first carbonot, of course, is the Olah, and over and over. And so as soon as I saw that, I said, well, wait a minute. They're not saying we will not come to you. We will not come up. Whenever I hear someone will not come up, it's like you're going to call him to the Torah and he says, no, thanks. It's like, I mean, this is an honor for all of us. Even just one more is lo ma'alot gera, which is translated as to the chazir, the pig, does not bring up cud. Most of your translation doesn't say bring up. It says, oh, they don't chew the cud. My answer is get out of here with your English translation because it's not correct. By the way, some verses, I've looked at 100 English translations, and I always have to go back to the Hebrew. I'm sorry.
Joel, what is the significance of the up part?
Olah, we are going to elevate ourselves. We're going to improve ourselves. 51 centuries ago, we didn't even know how to read or write because it wasn't invented yet. We're going to elevate ourselves really for my merit, because many times I say, I am so happy that I have a printed version of the Torah, or I can find a handwritten version, and I can verify what all these things mean. So go up means to elevate. And of course, the opposite of that would be chapter 38, verse 1, Vayared Yehuda. Okay, what that means is Yehuda went down. You read that chapter and you see he's on the wrong path.
That's Genesis 38:1, by the way.
Pardon?
Just clarifying, that's Genesis.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You gave a chapter and verse, but not a book.
Okay.
Judah is.
So that one word, for me, I think is one of the most important words we have. One of the most important concepts.
So you don't read that as a geographic, a physical moving.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. I agree.
Okay.
It's to go up spiritually.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, what do you make of the phrase right before that? Should you gouge out those men's eyes? Even if you had brought us to a land flowing with milk and honey and given us possession of fields and vineyards, should you gouge out those men's eyes?
Okay, what verse is that?
That is same verse you were on, 14, 16, chapter 16, verse 14. It's right before we will not come up, or we will not come. We will not go up.
I don't know. What do you think, Rabbi?
I mean, it seems to come out of left field. My best guess is that it has to do with the eye for an eye verses a couple chapters ago, and that Korach has been using that as, fodder. He's been like dramatizing what Moses actually said to freak people out,
Yeah.
My version has a note that says gouging out the eyes was typical punishment for runaway slaves and rebellious vassals. So maybe they were afraid to go to Moses because they thought that maybe he would wreak this punishment on them for being rebellious. And it also says that those men's eyes are a euphemism for our eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got another one.
Our meaning the reader, or our meaning Datan and Aviram?
Meaning, right,
Yeah.
the two.
Okay.
I have another translation. Are you trying to blind us to the true facts?
Ah,
That is from Rabbi Hertz, Hertz, back in about 1963.
That's interesting. I mean, that is
Very
definitely
interesting.
not, that's adding a lot of words that aren't there in the Hebrew, but maybe that's more to the point, to the meaning of the text, to Rabbi Hertz's interpretation. Yeah, Ibn Ezra and Rashi agree that with Debbie's second note, that the when it says these men's eyes, they mean our eyes, and they're afraid that Moses will do that if they go to him.
Okay. So that's
Nobody else is
a good,
loading, but that's what they say.
that's a good reason not to go.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say so. But also it's not, I mean, it's imagined. We have no reason to believe Moses will do that.
True.
that's
Which
because
is
we're
why I
not the
still think
rebels.
we're not the rebels. But I don't know.
I mean, they did this at, I assume at Korach, asking them to, and maybe they started thinking about, maybe this wasn't such a great idea, and
And now they're all
they started imagining all the things that could happen to them for this rebellion, and but they didn't imagine far enough.
yeah.
Joel sent something.
Oh, there's a new thing. Yeah, it's the Rashi today. I Going
Oh,
back
all
a
right.
little bit to
Thank you, Joel.
Joel's point about the root olah. I didn't think about it exactly in this context before, but I think it's interesting to think that they refuse to elevate themselves spiritually, and so then as punishment they are sent down into Sheol. That there is a an upper and lower spiritual plane at play here. I don't know. Also, I wanted to bring up the Haftarah, but now I don't remember what exactly. Something somebody said made me think about it. That it was about the intermediary roles of the priests. So the Haftarah for this parsha comes from the book of Samuel. It comes from where they're about to crown King Saul, and so I think the connection is that people people just sort of naturally desire a human leader, and that it's quite impossible to share responsibility the way Korach is asking for, because when they are told to have, just God, they can't deal. So that's the connection. But also Samuel is a descendant of Korach, according to Chronicles. And that's an example of, so Samuel's father brings the sacrifices to thank God for all of his children and his wealth, and the priests take the sacrifices and communicate. I can't think of Samuel's father's name right now, but communicate his gratitude to God. But meanwhile, Hannah just sits in the sanctuary and prays herself and is granted her prayer. God listens to her. The priest does still come out and says, like, oh, I see that you are a prayerful woman, so your wish will be granted. But he doesn't do anything to facilitate that. Like, she prays, God heeds her, she gives birth to Samuel. So I do think there's still something to that of like that sometimes we still need facilitators in our spiritual life, or we need leaders in our community life, but ultimately we are still all holy and have access to the divine if it is within us to, if we choose to go up, if it is within us to reach that possibility, to be our best selves. Yeah, Joel.
The word you're looking for is Elkanah.
Elkanah, thank you. That guy. Hannah and Penina. Yeah. So those are my thoughts on that. Anybody, I mean, we're sort of arcing toward the close. Were there other big questions or anything that jumped out at you?
So,
David, you look like you have one.
I was trying to think of where it was. There's something about when the earth opens up and they go alive instead of.
Here.
Oh, yes. They go alive in the show.
Yeah.
Does that mean that it's worse for them, or does that mean they could come back out again, or exactly?
I think both is the implication. So, we don't know a whole lot about Sheol. Like, there's not a lot of extrapolation on it, other than in Kabbalah, which comes much later. But I think it's meant to be indicative of I don't know, like the drama of the moment, that they weren't just like struck dead, but that the whole earth opened wide and they had no time to escape or to like whatever, that there was no sense of finality for the people watching this happen to Korach and his men, that they've fallen and the earth covers up and they're just gone. There is a midrash. Hold on, let me pull it back up. Nope, not that one. Bava Batra says because they are swallowed alive, they are constantly just beneath the surface, and in some midrashim, they literally bubble up and force later generations to encounter them. They are in constant motion in the underworld of Gehenna, roiling around like boiling water as they eternally assert that Moses and the Torah are true, and we, the Korachites, are liars, that they have to just like deal with this reality forever and just kind of like, follow.
So I was just confused if it's a form of hell or what it's supposed to be.
Yes, I do. Sheol is often compared to hell, but we don't. I mean, I don't know. I guess like if the earth opens up and swallows you whole, and the core of the earth is molten, whatever, that fits what people's conceptions of hell is, right? Fire and brimstone. I don't know. Yeah, Joel.
Yes, so of course Debbie had a question about chronology, and of course that we face that every day. And uh, I always try to look at the sources of when these verses were written. And I have an image. I think I'll put it right into the chat if you want to look at it. And they use a color coding. I just pulled a couple. That's maybe 16:1 through 16:11, and you can see they have made a shift in the color of the various English translation. And this shift in color, now in this particular case, we notice there's green, and then it then is followed by lime green. And there's a difference of 85 years. So in other words, there was some document originally there, and over a period of this 85 years, right at this particular verse, a new bunch of guys came in. And then the new bunch of guys happened to be the priests. That's the P level, according to the documentary hypothesis. So these guys said, yeah, we like what you've done. This is great, but we're going to redact it. We're going to edit this to reflect our own opinion. And by the way, the entire 5 books of Moses has this appearance. And sometimes it's really so helpful, because when I'm troubled by a certain phrase, I said, wait a minute, you're contradicting what I just read. What are you doing to my head over here? And then if I pull it apart and I can say, this was first, this was second. And by the way, a lot of the Tanakh, I'm looking at least a 500-year period when this was edited, redacted. So imagine here we are today trying to read something in 2021, and some guy comes up with something from 1521. Oh my God, we don't even understand it. And oh my God, never mind, I'm going to edit it a little bit. Now move forward a couple thousand years, and a lot of this information is lost. So I don't know, Rabbi Goldstein, where do you stand with documentary hypothesis, multiple sources? Is it helpful? Does it go against? It goes against rabbinics in a lot of ways. I'm sorry, but I think that as postmodern generation, we have to become educated in all of this. Also, it's right in Talmud. It says, "Ein mokdam uchar b'Torah." There is no before, there is no after in Torah. So that's why I incorporate this into my thinking.
Now, I've liked when you've said that before, Joel, about chronology being circular, so to speak, in Torah, but I just had been curious about a reason for Korach's rebellion, and I do like the idea of him not liking Moses' unilateral decision on leadership and where the people were going to go and when the people were going to go, and it made sense. But I do like the circular chronology that you've espoused before.
How do you feel about it? Is Korach correct in trying to make more of a democracy, or is it best not to have a democracy, but to have a theocracy? So how do you feel? And there's no right answer.
No.
You can put it either way.
Well,
I think today we do have more of a democracy in the Jewish religion than a theocracy. We have Reform, we have Reconstructionists, we have Orthodox, we have Haredi, and no one's going over there and saying, oh no, you got it all wrong.
And in one congregation, we have the rabbi, and we have the congregants, and we have the president, and we have mothers-in-law, and we have.
yeah. I mean, I like what what Rabbi Waskow says about, in um his drash, that Moses and Korach are both right in some ways. Um, and it's about timing and um methods and, you know, so I certainly feel that.
I think it seems in the end that Korah had to suffer so that the system could keep, at this critical juncture, could keep working and moving together so that people understood the role that God set up Moses and the role that God set up Aaron for. But like you said, maybe at another time, I like that drush that you said, that he was swallowed up to sprout at a later date. I like that. And we've seen that over and over again, that sometimes people suffer not in the Bible and in real life, I suppose. They suffer not so much for what they do, but because for the greater good,
Right.
or whatever.
Earlier in Rabbi Waskow's Devar Torah, he says, during Martin Luther King's lifetime, he was often criticized by the band of little-known grassroots civil rights workers who understood his limitations. They feared his charisma would distract attention and support from the hard, gritty work of day-to-day organizing. And I'm not really sure, he doesn't really expand on that. And I keep getting stuck there. Is in his analogy, is Moses king and Korach is the gritty organizer? And then
I guess.
and they had to work in tandem. I'm not
No.
sure. I guess part of why I'm stuck on that specifically is because I do think so much about Korach every year when we read it. I think about Korach in terms of community organizing and, and progressive activism and things like that, and its necessity and its shortcomings, right? And so but I'm not sure then who is the Korach analogy of, or who is the analogous Korach character of real life? Malcolm X? Too radical? Good ideas, bad means?
That's a good one. Yeah, because I guess Martin, maybe it's easy for us to prefer Martin Luther King's peace movement. But was he becoming more of a cult figure than a democratic leader? And did Malcolm X pay for that? I mean, there's lots of guesses as to why Malcolm X got killed, but it's an interesting analogy.
Something else I saw in Rabbi Waskow's drush was that the name Korach means frozen, which I did not know. And his comparison of that with that he himself was kind of locked into a view of leadership that was frozen in time. He could only think, well, what are you trying to be, the Pharaoh, and direct everything? We're a holy people. We don't need this anymore. when in fact, they did need something, a great deal more. And I think if Moses had been told by God at the time of the burning bush what was going to be entailed, he would have said, no, thanks, I'll pass.
Which he
this is
did
too
say.
much."
He did try to do that, right?
Didn't work, but I think he would have been more adamant because, golly, imagine all those years putting up with people bitching and moaning, complaining.
That's the role of a leader, though, is to drag people along when they don't want to.
Yep. I would not have been a good leader, I will tell you that.
I don't know this word, depilate.
Depilatory, those creams that you use to remove hair.
Oh, okay.
Also, ice is also correct, or frozen.
Yeah. Yeah, I never thought about the root of Korach before either. But I liked the frozen metaphor that Rabbi Waskow used. I'm not sure to make bald. So is then, if we read that interpretation, then is the hint meaning of Korach's name about, that, I don't know, the emperor has no clothes, like that he's drawing attention to either the shortcomings of his own proposed leadership model or to Moses's. He's a fascinating character, I think, for sure. There's a lot to still speculate and interpret about his life in this one scene that we get of him. So, oh, what is this? Baldness. Interesting.
So that's just a little window. Many times when I'm stuck, as we're stuck now, I will try to go back to verses in the Tanakh and see where the identical word, the identical root is used over and over. And sometimes it becomes pretty clear to me, like what I don't understand right now, by studying other verses, I will learn more. And of course, we have all our sages. By the way, Dave Gilbert, I was so happy last week. You said you were looking at something at Sepharia, and by accident, you clicked on something. Next thing you know, there you are right in the middle with Rashi and Ibn Ezra. And I think, oh my God, that's so outstanding.
Oh, I was very happy with it. Like I found, I don't go through every verse and then click on every source that's available in English. But I just found one while we were discussing it by someone named, I've never heard the name, Chiz Cooney.
He's Cooney.
He's Cooney.
Pronounce it again.
It's a ch,
Ch.
Hebrew.
Chiz Cooney.
He's Cooney, yeah.
He's Cooney. Who was he, or time period, ballpark?
I believe I have to look it up again, but I believe he's like 12th century.
So roughly around the time of Rashi.
1250, yeah.
Okay, and he has a really nice explanation of the gouging of the eyes, the blindness. But I've never even seen his name before anywhere. So that was interesting. But yeah, I cannot believe the wealth inside Sepharia.
It's amazing. I love
Yeah.
Safaria.
I can see, I mean, before I liked the Chabad because it had the Rashi, you can turn it on and off. But this
Yeah.
is even more valuable because I can, instead of seeing it for verses I'm not really interested in, now I can come to a verse I'm stuck on, click on it, and then boom, just keep loading up people and seeing what they have to say. It's really amazing.
It is. And it's primarily volunteer driven and donation driven. People just
They're certainly
add
getting,
translations when they can.
they're certainly getting a donation from me this year. This is terrific.
Yeah. Um,
They also have the complete Talmud, the William Davidson version, and many times you can click, like for example, Rashi himself, he doesn't say, oh, this is my idea. I'm not going to be foolish like Joel Eichen. I'm going to only quote from the Talmud. Or, he uses the Talmud to support most of his ideas,
right.
if not all. I don't know.
Well, he wrote a whole commentary on the Talmud too. So
So, Rabbi Goldstein, do you believe that he did this by himself, or was there a school of Rashi where he had 50 people who were writing drafts, and he'd run around from table to table? Yeah, I like this, or no, this sucks. Is it one man's effort, or is it a school of Rashi? Do you know?
that's a good question. I have to say I'm very influenced by Rashi's Daughters, so which I recognize as fiction, but it's very well researched fiction, um, where it does start off as his own project, but as his yeshiva grows, he incorporates his sons-in-laws, and there is some material derived from his students. But it's hard for me to imagine it was too much of its own school per se, rather than a Rashi driven project with some input from his own personal students, because then we have Tosafot, which is a whole school led by his grandson. So like if he had a school like that, then I feel like Tosafot would be more connected to it. You know what I mean? Like I feel like there would be less separation between Rashi and Tosafot. Um, so it still makes me think, even if it wasn't all 100% him, it was he was enough the leader, right? Back to this concept of what it means to be in charge, or to be the charismatic face of a whole movement. That he was enough in that position that he earned more the credit. Whatever that means.
Hmm.
I don't know. Um, So, and by the way, Rashi and Tosafot are on pretty much every page of Talmud. Any edition of Talmud that you find will have, the Talmud in the middle, and then Rashi on one side, and then it sort of depends. In my Steinsaltz edition, Tosafot are on the bottom, and Steinsaltz is on the other side. But sometimes Tosafot are on the other side, and Ibn Ezra or somebody will be on the bottom. It depends on what edition, but those two are always included. Yeah, Joel.
Are you talking about like a printed edition
Yeah,
of
yeah,
insults?
yeah.
So how did they handle the English and the Hebrew or the Aramaic? Is it like side by
There's no
side?
English in the edition I used for rabbinical school. The Aramaic is in the middle,
Yeah.
and then Steinsaltz is written in modern Hebrew. His commentary is written in his own, tongue. Um, and then Rashi is in Rashi script on a side. Rashi didn't even write in Rashi script. Why do I have to learn this new lettering? Anyway, and then the bottom was, like I said, it was Tosafot, and then sometimes like footnotes or other, it would be like this same passage is repeated in this other volume or whatever, that kind of stuff. But it was all in Hebrew.
Oh, so you had to actually translate all that by yourself. Must have been
Yes.
so hard.
Yes. Well, I mean, it was school. So now that I am out of school, I am collecting the Koren Steinsaltz English edition, where the Aramaic and the English are side by side, verse by verse. And then the Rashi. Is the Rashi in the English? I guess the Rashi is on the bottom in the English, and then the Steinsaltz or Koren publisher footnotes are on this side margin, and it's the volumes are split in half, so the English side is not formatted like a normal Talmud page. Like it reads sort of more like a Tanakh with Rashi would, where like the English and the Hebrew is side by side, and it goes, the whole page is the verse, and then just at the bottom margin is the notes, and then the back side is the full, the daf with the Aramaic in the middle and the Rashi and the Tosafot along the sides and bottom. But yeah, now that I'm not in school anymore, I'm not really interested in suffering through translating Aramaic. But it was a good, I did it for 7 semesters. Anyway, so that's all. I'll see you guys. Next week is our last Torah study together. It's not the end of a book or anything, of a sefer, but we should, I don't know, we'll do something for a siyum, of like a closing study session thing. And I'll see you all then.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi,
Bye,
Joel,
everybody.
Dave, and Debbie.